people here consider themselves libertarians?
You move the mic over.
How many people here consider themselves libertarians? How many consider themselves not libertarians? Oh, wow. I was first put in the room with the North Carolina delegation, and they didn't really look like libertarians. I'm not sure why. They weren't, so I had a different speech for them, but I'll give you the tougher stuff. How many people were yesterday at the Ron Paul convention? Okay, well then you heard my speech. And on abortion, I'm not going to talk about that now. I talked about it before, but I just wanted to say that this was the first time that what I thought was a friendly audience had a lot of people very critical. And my attitude toward this is libertarianism is not a fixed thing. It's a growing thing. And the only way we're going to grow it and improve it is if we hear new ideas. Now, maybe my new idea is wrong, but the way to deal with a wrong new idea is to criticize it or publish articles against it or something like that. Whereas to squelch it and not allow it to be heard, that means that libertarianism never progresses. And we don't want that, I think. We want libertarianism to progress. Okay, I'm going to speak for, I don't know, maybe a half hour, 40 minutes, and then I understand there's nothing else on the program until noon, so we can have questions, discussions, dialogue. Yes?
Can you move your mic a little bit back? Because you're speaking right into it, we're getting that.
Is that better now? Which is better?
There you go. Is that better?
You're outvoted.
There's a thumping noise.
Oh, is this okay now? You want no thumping, but you want to be heard. Is that better now? Okay.
We need a louder mic.
How are we doing now? Good. Is there someone taping this, these proceedings? Who's taping them?
Right here.
Ask if the back of the room can hear you.
Can the people in the back of the room hear me?
Not very well.
Not very well. This man looks like he's in control of something, so I'll keep talking and maybe eventually...
You need to speak closer to the mic.
Closer? But this is too close and I was tapping out. So I'm not sure. Maybe I shouldn't be close, but you should make it louder?
The mic picks up.
How's this? Is this better? Yes? We all together?
Just go ahead.
You want to communicate? Before I start, I've still got 2 more of these books, and they're heavy, so I don't want to go back to New Orleans with them. So if anyone is interested, this is my book on Ron Paul. Please come up afterwards, $30 each. I give you a fair warning. I have a lot of wind in me, and I'm going to huff and puff, and I'm going to blow Isaac back here, because I'm going to New Orleans, and I don't want it to mess us up. But I don't have that much hot air, so maybe you're safe here, I'm not sure. I'm going to spend most of my time on the minimum wage law, because our man, Mitt Romney, favors the minimum wage law. And I think this is a big mistake, and hopefully it'll filter out to him and change his mind on that, or at least we'll get that going. But I wanted to say a few other things. We have a bunch of sayings, mottos, whatever. For example, bring the troops home. And I think this is more than a bumper sticker. This is something very important, because we have places, 900 military bases in 140 different countries now. And people say that when Ron Paul is against this, he's against defense. But surely we can distinguish defense from offense. I mean, in basketball games, when the other team has got the ball, the home team is always yelling defense, defense. They can distinguish between defense and offense. Whereas having all these troops all over the place doesn't seem to me to be defense, it seems to be offense. If any other country were doing this, Brazil or China or Indonesia had 900 military bases in 140 countries, including the U.S., and they had the temerity to call that defense, we would all see through it. Why can't we see through it when it's our own country? It takes more of a leap of faith, I guess, but you know, we have to see that, I think. Another one is end the Fed. You know, you say end the Fed in certain rooms, like yesterday, and then people start screaming, end the Fed, end the Fed. Again, this is not just a bumper sticker. It's not just a motto. There's something very sensible in there. Now, the Fed was started in 1913. We're almost in 2013, so it's about 100 years after. And if you look at the 100 years before 1913 and the 100 years after, which is past 100 years roughly, you notice several things. One, you notice that the dollar, the value of the dollar has been dissipated. The value of the dollar in 1913 was $1, and now it's about 4 cents. So they've inflated away 96 cents of it, or 96% of it. My kids are now 32 and 34. When they were 2 and 4, my wife and I joined a babysitting co-op, which means, you know, we would babysit for the other couple. There were 5 couples that would babysit for us, and we would keep records. And, you know, we had certain credits if we babysat, and if we had other people babysitting for us, then we owed them. Imagine if somebody got in there and started inflating and counterfeiting, creating babysitting chits for babysitting that didn't occur. And now we'd have to babysit all the time, and no one would babysit for us. Well, these chits are sort of a money, right? And if somebody inflates them, then you have to do more work. They dissipate the value of your wealth, because the money is a way of keeping, among other things, it's a way of keeping track of wealth. It also intermediates trade, which is very important, but if the dollar gets dissipated, it's hard to intermediate trade. If we don't intermediate trade, we mess up the entire economy. There are some historians that go so far as to say that the reason we had the rise of Hitler was because of the depression of, the hyperinflation of 1923, which just messed up the German economy. And you needed a demagogue, I guess, or demagogues came into their own, became more powerful. And there are serious historians who say that we had World War II and Hitler and the Holocaust and all that. So, because of hyperinflation. Now, we don't have hyperinflation now. We're not Zimbabwe. We don't trade in trillion-dollar bills, and, you know, some people get these trillion-dollar bills, but this is serious business. They dissipated 96% of the value of the dollar. And, you know, Bernanke, with his quantitative easing, 1, 2, 3, 17, 19, whatever, that's the way we're going to be going. So, end the Fed is not just a bumper sticker motto. It's something, it is a bumper sticker motto, and that's good, but it really reveals something very important. Another one is end the drug war. This is very important too. The drug war, you see, a lot of people don't distinguish between legalizing drugs and favoring drugs. Now, I don't favor drugs. I don't think it's a good idea to have heroin and marijuana and stuff like that. But I don't think people should be put in jail for that, and that is a crucial distinction. I mean, if you can't distinguish between prohibiting something or opposing the prohibition and favoring the use of, we know there's that joke, do you know the difference between a bathroom and a living room? And if you say no, I say, don't come to my house. Well, if you don't know the difference between prohibiting something and, or rather opposing the prohibition of something and favoring the legalization of something, which are very, very different, don't get into political economy. Don't get into economics or philosophy. I have a daughter, 32 now. I wouldn't want her to be a prostitute. God forbid she should be a prostitute, but if she were, I wouldn't want her to go to jail for it if she confined her acts to consenting adults. So there's all the world of difference between favoring something and wanting to legalize it. And libertarians want to legalize freedom, which is another bumper sticker of ours. And Ron Paul is forever saying that we want to legalize freedom, and I think that that's very eloquent. Also, another bumper sticker saying or motto is President Paul, President Paul. I like Ron Paul 16. Ron Paul 16. As I said the other day, he'll just be a young 80. Life begins at 80, I think. I don't know. I'm hoping. And that way it would keep the movement alive. Okay, let me talk a little bit, before I get to the minimum wage, where I'll spend a lot of time. There are several other issues I've got on my list: egalitarianism, welfare, collectivism, harm. Let me start with harm. A lot of people misconstrue libertarianism and they say that you can't do any harm. But that's not accurate. The essence of libertarianism, as I see it, is the non-aggression principle on the one hand, keep your mitts off of the persons and property of other people, and the other is property rights, because if you don't know who owns what, it's hard to tell whether something is aggression or not. For example, if I'm in a boxing match and I punch my opponent in the nose, or he punches me, is this assault and battery? No, because we've given up property rights to each other to hit above the belt. Or if I'm in a sadomasochistic relationship, again, which I don't advocate, but I think it should be legal for adults, consenting adults, and one of them whips the other, it's not assault and battery because they've given permission, namely the property rights have changed. If I come down there and grab that umbrella off that chair, sitting right next to this lady, have I committed theft? Well, it depends on property rights. If it's mine, no. If it's that lady's, but she stole it from me yesterday, well then I'm just repossessing my own property. On the other hand, if it's hers, as I suspect, then I am indeed engaging in theft. So the question of whether I'm committing aggression or not intimately depends upon property rights. So that's the way I see libertarianism, whereas the idea of harm, you can harm people in many, many ways. For example, if I open a bakery across the street from your bakery shop and I steal half your customers, in a sense I've harmed you, right? But that's perfectly legitimate. Okay? So it's a misconstrual of libertarianism to say that the essence of libertarianism is against harm. Another one is collectivism. Libertarians like to say that they're for individualism and against collectivism. Now, in Austrian economics, there is such a thing as a methodological individualism, and I'm a big fan of methodological individualism, and what that means is groups can't act. Only individuals can act. There's no such thing as the social welfare function or the group welfare or anything. There are only individuals, and individuals are the focus of proper Austrian economics, even if it's not true for mainstream economics. But then there's something else about collectivism. There's nothing wrong with voluntary collectivism. The kibbutz, the commune, the nunnery, the monastery, a lot of people, look, even the average family agrees with the Marxist notion of from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Returning to my kids when they were 2 and 4, they ate in accordance not with their ability to produce income, but in accordance with their need. So there's nothing wrong with collectivism or even socialism if it's done on a voluntary basis. The problem is with coercive socialism, where you're forced to join into the commune whether you want to or not. So I think this is an important distinction also to make. Another one is egalitarianism. People think, we should help the poor, and believe me, I'm in favor of helping the poor as long as it's on a voluntary basis. But when we talk about redistribution, taking money from the 1% and giving to the other people, as Barack Obama wants to do, and as our friends on the left want to do, the argument I sometimes use against them is, let's not talk about redistributing money. Let's talk about redistributing something much more important. Suppose that I had a machine that could transfer IQ points from people who have too much IQ and to give it to people who are too low an IQ. So you have an IQ of 130 and someone else has got an IQ of 70. We put you both in the machine, we flip the switch, and you both come out with an IQ of 100. Sound fair? No, it sounds like assault and battery. I mean, this is horrendous. Or take eyes. Most of us here have 2 eyes. There are blind people that could use an eye. If you only have 1 eye, you don't have much depth perception, but you can get along pretty well with only 1 eye. So why don't I go around the room and grab 1 eye out of all of you and give it to people that don't have any eye and say, well, this is egalitarianism. In other words, what I'm trying to do is take this to its logical conclusion. I'm not trying to say, well, let's take a little money from these people and give it to those people. Let's take their eyes, or let's take their IQ points, and then people start to think. Another one that I use when I'm debating someone on this egalitarianism is I start saying, you live in a house? Usually it's another professor who has a house and a car, and he's got a nice suit, and he's got a nice watch, and I say, well, you know, there are poor people out there, why don't you give it to them? And hopefully it's like a reductio ad absurdum. Another reductio ad absurdum is when I was once in a debate with people who were saying we have overpopulation, we have too many people. So I was at the podium and I said, my opponent will be coming up to the stage in a minute. He's going to say that there are too many people. He has it within his power to reduce the size of the population by 1. He hasn't done it. You can see him standing there smiling. Well, I mean, if you're going to be logically consistent and you think that there's overpopulation, you have a way out of that. You can reduce the size of the population by 1. And also, there's an unfair distribution of hair follicles. There are some of you who have too many, and there are some of us, me, who have too few. And I think that, is there a problem, Boz? Oh, okay, good. I invited an extra person, he's being kicked out, but all's well. So, you know, if instead of looking at it through money, you look at it through hair follicles or eyes or IQ points, which are equally legitimate things to redistribute, then redistribution starts looking in a very different way. Another point I want to make about egalitarianism or welfare is based on a book by Charles Murray called Losing Ground. Anyone read that book? Just one person? A very good book. Charles Murray is famous for the bell curve, but this is a different book of his. It's a very good book. And what he says is that the welfare system didn't really get cracking. It was very niggardly. I hope no one misconstrues my use of that word. Until LBJ, our friend LBJ, got into it and really ramped up the welfare level. And then what happened, before that, if a young girl got pregnant without a husband, it was a disgrace. She had to go off and move with Aunt Tilly or something and come back, and maybe the baby was adopted. It was just a disgrace. But what Charles Murray tells us is that when the welfare system ramped up, the welfare system made an offer to a young pregnant woman much better than could come to her from the father of her child through the minimum wage law. And it was such a much better offer. You get a house, you get medical care, you get clothing, you get this, you get that it sort of broke apart the social fabric. And it's not just a black thing, although blacks are leading us in failure of a family to form. But it occurs in Sweden too, where they do this, where it's mostly white people, and what you have is a breakup of the family because of this economic incentive not to get married. Because if you get married, if there's a man in the house, you don't get all these welfare goodies. So in some cities, 70% of black families are not formed, or they don't form. That's the point. You see, slavery was not powerful enough to break up the black family. The analogy I sometimes use here is, if you put a frog in cold water and you heat it up slowly, the frog stays in there, its metabolism is such that it can't tell the difference between a minor change in temperature. But if you throw a frog in boiling water, its metabolism recognizes it and it jumps out. Well, slavery for black people was like boiling water. Slavery did not ruin the black family. After the aftermath of slavery in 1865, there were ads in all sorts of newspapers, you know, Mary Sue is looking for Hiram, where are you? And the families would get back together. I looked at the 1910 census, which was about 55, 60 years after the slavery, and the black and the white family were about the same. The white family had a 1% or a 2% advantage in terms of coherence, namely non-divorce and non-illegitimacy. But when the welfare system came about, thanks to LBJ and the Democratic Party, and even some people in the Republican Party, it broke up the black family, which is horrible because, you know, if you look at the poverty rate, there are virtually no poor people with an intact family. The poverty is virtually an incidence of a non-intact family. And what's not creating divorce, but causing the family not to join together in the first place is this bloody welfare system. So how can you say you're a humanitarian if you favor something that ruins the family? And the family is a proxy variable for all sorts of things. If you're from an intact family, you can read, you're less likely to be a criminal, you're less likely to get in problems in various ways. Whereas if you're in a non-intact family, all sorts of problems occur, including poverty. So one way, paradoxically, to get rid of poverty is to get rid of welfare, because welfare creates poverty. Okay, I'm Michelle Bachmann, Congressman Bachmann was kind enough to mention Mises and Austrian economics, and I am a big fan. I consider myself an Austrian economist. And I now want to get, with these sort of preliminary things, I wanted to warm you up with those things, and now I wanted to get into something a little bit more difficult to see, the minimum wage law. And when I heard that Mitt Romney favored it, a lot of the wind went out of me, because this is a despicable law. And yet, on the surface of it, it sounds good. Minimum wage law, we have poverty, let's raise wages. I mean, it seems reasonable. If somebody's making $4 an hour and you pass a law saying you've got to make 5 and everyone makes 5, well, 5 is nothing to write home about, but 5 is better than 4, and let's go up to 6. The problem, though, is suppose we have a minimum wage law of $100 an hour. I mean, again, why be so niggardly? If it's such a great idea to raise wages, why raise it to just $10 or $8 or whatever the number is? Because we know if it was $100 an hour, nobody would be employed, or very few people would be employed, because the employer, if he has to pay $100 an hour and your productivity is less than that, if your productivity is $20 an hour and he has to pay you $100 an hour, he's going to lose $80 an hour if he hires you, and if he hires you, he's going to go broke, and he's not going to hire you in the first place, so you'll just be unemployed. So the minimum wage law is not a floor on the wages, that as you raise the minimum wage law, wages go up. Rather, you know, I was just watching the Olympics, and these people, they can jump over 8 feet of the high bar. I mean, it's 8 feet. They jump right over it. The minimum wage law is like a high jump bar. The higher it is, you have to jump over the high jump bar to get a job. And the higher it is, the harder it is to jump, and if they keep raising it, it's hard to get a job. If the minimum wage bar is raised to $100 an hour, virtually none of us get employed. So what the minimum wage law does is make it impossible for people to get jobs if their productivity is less than whatever is specified by the minimum wage. And yet this is sometimes hard to see. Going back in history, the first minimum wage was 25 cents an hour in 1938, and it went to 30 cents in 1939, and then it went to 40 cents in 1945, and then it jumped in 1950 to 75 cents. This was the highest percentage increase ever of the minimum wage. It was practically a doubling. And what happened, those of you who are of my age remember that when you get into an elevator, there was a guy standing there. He wasn't a pervert. He was the elevator operator. For you young pups, you know, you don't know from an elevator, I can just press a button. But in the old days, there was this thing called manually operated elevators. And the minimum wage law went up from 40 cents to 75 cents. And guess how many people lost their jobs the very next day? A big fat zero. None of them lost their jobs the very next day, because it takes a little while for the economic system to work out. Look, if a building manager had started firing people, the tenants would say, look, we're paying you a certain rent predicated on 10 elevators in this building, and now we only have 9? You know, give us a break or we're going to sue you. So nobody lost their job the next day or the next week or the next month. But then there were always automatic elevators able to operate, but they couldn't compete with people manually operating them at 40 cents an hour, but they could compete with manual operation at 75 cents an hour. So little bit by little bit, they trickled in. And people thought, well, it's just automation, or it takes a while to go from automatic, or rather from manually operated elevators to automatic elevators. You just don't do it like that. And they never associated with the minimum wage law. They start talking about interest rates or who knows, automation, whatever. But what happened is that the minimum wage law moved us out of manually operated elevators and into automatic elevators. Let me give you another case in point. When I was a kid, first driving, I was born in 1941, I'm now 71, you pull into a service station and you would be attacked by about 5 people. One would put the gas in, one would check the oil, one would check the tire pressure, one would wash this window, one would wash that window. The minimum wage law lost us all these entry-level jobs. Because now, if you have to pay so much, they go to self-serve. Right? You see, the job market is sort of like a ladder. It's got different levels. And if you're at the bottom of the level, you have to learn. It's called on-the-job training. You're at a gas station, and you might hold a wrench for the mechanic and sort of peer over his shoulder, and maybe he'd teach you a little bit about what he's doing, how to change a tire or whatever he was doing there. But now, the bottom rungs of the employment ladder are cut off. Because you have to be worth, I don't know what the minimum wage law is now, it keeps changing, and there's a federal one, and each state has a different one, but if it's $8 an hour, and your productivity is $5 an hour, you can't get a job. What do I mean by productivity? What I mean by productivity, technically it's called marginal revenue product, but just for short, productivity. Assume you're an employer and you have 100 workers and you get $10,000 from them in a certain period of time, and now you hire a 101st worker, and all of a sudden your receipts shoot up to $10,010. Namely, you attribute the extra $10 from hiring one more worker. We say, well, that worker's productivity, marginal revenue productivity, is $10 an hour. Suppose there were no minimum wage law, and my productivity is $10 an hour. I'm this guy that if you hire, your receipts go up by just a little smidgen, $10 an hour. What's the first offer that you're going to make me? You're a fat capitalist pig exploiter, you want to exploit workers. What offer are you going to make me so that I hire you? $1. No, you're too generous. The right answer is negative infinity. Namely, I have to pay you an infinite amount of money for the privilege of working for you. But let's forget about negative numbers. The first positive number is a penny. Why would you offer me $1? The workers will get uppity, you want to maximize profits. You don't offer $1, you offer a penny. But if you offer me a penny, what profit are you making off of me? $9.99. Well, okay, so now we're having a bidding war for me, and somebody offered me a penny. What's the next offer? 2 cents. And now you make $9.98. Of course, each employer sort of applauds exploiting workers because we're all capitalist pigs. We want to drive workers down into the ground. But each of us thinks, better that I exploit him for $9.98 than he exploit him for $9.99. And someone else will say, well, I'll pay 3 cents an hour, and I'll exploit it for $9.97. Now, I like exploiting workers to $9.99 better than $9.97, but I like it better that I exploit them for $9.97 than the other guy for $9.89. You see where I'm going with this. We will get up to $1, at which time you're making $9 pure profit, but someone else will say $1.01. There is a tendency for wages to equal marginal revenue product. The reason Mitt Romney made a lot of money in Bain was not because of the generosity of anybody, it was because his productivity was high. They wanted to hire him. The reason I make a middle-class salary as a professor is because I have a certain level of productivity. The people who push brooms or ask if you want to have fries with that have a lower level of productivity, but what creates their wages, what undergirds their wages, is not the generosity of the employer. That seems to be the alternative theory, that wages are determined by the generosity of employers. Employers don't have much generosity, therefore we have to have a minimum wage. This is crazy.
How about inflation?
I'm sorry, inflation?
Yes.
What about inflation?
Doesn't that affect the wage?
Well, I'm talking in terms of real dollars. So I wouldn't be talking in terms of, I'm not assuming inflation. You know, we can only deal with one problem at a time, and now I'm implicitly assuming a non-inflationary situation, but that's a good question. See, my contention as an economist is that free enterprise, private property rights, and economic freedom is a recipe for peace, prosperity, and the reduction of poverty. It's mankind's last best hope for a civilized order. This is just part and parcel of free trade. If I, let's say I have this book here, and you have a tie, and we're going to make a trade. And you're going to give me the tie for the book, and I'm going to give you the book for the trade, for the tie. It must mean that you value the book more than the tie, otherwise you wouldn't give me your tie for the book, and it must mean that I value your time more than the book, otherwise I wouldn't do it. So every trade is beneficial, mutually beneficial, in the ex ante sense, in the sense of anticipation. Now, it might be that after you get the book, you say, boy, this book is a piece of crap. I wish I had my tie back. And I might say, well, you know, your tie is a piece of crap. You know, it's falling apart. It's red. It stands for communism or something. So there's no guarantee that ex post every trade is mutually beneficial. But the presumption is, you know, you buy a newspaper for $1, and the presumption, even if there was no good news or you didn't like the news, you're not going to say, well, I wish I didn't buy that newspaper, because you sort of know that, you know, at the time you bought it, you valued the newspaper more than $1, otherwise you wouldn't have given up the $1, and they valued your $1 more than the newspaper, otherwise they wouldn't have given up the newspaper. So everything is mutually beneficial. And this applies also for the labor market. It's not just in terms of barter or in terms of buying newspapers, but in the labor market too. So if I have a job for $10 an hour, it means that I value the $10 an hour more than my foregone leisure, what I could have been doing if I weren't working, and it must mean that they value the productivity that I give them more than the $10. Otherwise, why are they paying for this? Let me look at my notes for more stuff on the minimum wage. I think I'm now about finished with the minimum wage. The minimum wage doesn't undergird wages. It rather is a barrier over which you have to jump in order to get a job. The best minimum wage is 0. Because, look, if the minimum wage is 50 cents, then all people under 50 cents will not be able to be employed. You might say, well, who can't even produce 50 cents worth? And there are mentally handicapped people who can't. And they make exceptions for mentally handicapped people, and they make exceptions for teenagers. You know, during the summer, everyone, all the good guys, the nice people, the politicians who don't know economics, they're always saying, you know, please, please hire a teenager. And then what they do is they make an exception for teenagers, teenage minimum wage law. Like in many states, the minimum wage law for adults might be $8 an hour, and then they'll make a teen minimum wage of $3 an hour. But if the minimum wage law is really a floor under wages, propping up wages, why be so nasty to teenagers? So by making an exception for mentally handicapped people or teenagers, what they're really doing is admitting that the minimum wage law isn't propping up wages, it's rather a barrier over which you have to jump to get a job. So this is a reductio ad absurdum, similar to the point about hair follicles and the other points I was making about overpopulation. By making exceptions to this for people who have a hard time getting jobs, they're admitting this. Well, if they admit this, why don't we just get rid of it? Well, the question is, quo bono, who benefits? Why do we have the minimum wage law if it's such a nasty, horrible thing? And the answer is unions. Because when the union organized labor, and I'm no big fan of organized labor, when the union demanded